Good evening. This is Pamela, and you're listening to Watchman on the Pod. We're going to continue in our book reading of 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Charles Chiniquy, and we are on chapter 43. The 11 months spent in the monastery of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate were among the greatest favors God has granted me. What I had read of the monastic orders and what my honest, though deluded imagination had painted of the holiness, purity, and happiness of the monastic life could not be blotted out of my mind except by a kind of miraculous interposition. No testimony whatever could have convinced me that the monastic institutions were not one of the most blessed of the gospel. Their existence in the bosom of the Church of Rome was, for me, an infallible token of her divine institution and miraculous preservation, and their absence among Protestants one of the most strongest proofs that these heretics were entirely separated from Christ. Without religious orders, the Protestant denominations were to me as dead and decayed branches cut from the true vine, which are doomed to perish. But just as the eyes of Thomas were opened, and his intelligence was convinced of the divinity of Christ only after he had seen the wounds in his hands and side, so I could never have believed that the monastic institutions were of heathen and diabolical origin, if my God had not forced me to see with my own eyes and to touch with my own fingers their unspeakable corruptions. Though I remained for some time longer a sincere Catholic priest, I dare say that God himself had just broken the strongest tie of my affections and respect for that church. It is true that several pillars remained, on which my robust faith in the holiness and apostolicity of the church rested for a few years longer, but I must here confess to the glory of God that the most solid of these pillars had forever crumbled to pieces when in the monastery of Longueuil. Long before my leaving the Oblates, many influential priests of the district of Montreal had told me that my only chance of success, if I wanted to continue my crusade against the demon of drunkenness, was to work alone. Those monks are pretty good speakers on temperance, they unanimously said, but they are nothing else than a band of comedians. After delivering their eloquent tirades against the use of intoxicating drinks to the people, the first thing they do is ask for a bottle of wine, which soon disappears. What fruit can we expect from the preaching of men who do not believe a word of what they say, and who are the first among themselves to turn their own arguments into ridicule? It is very different with you. You believe what you say. You are consistent with yourself. Your hearers feel it. Your profound, scientific, and Christian convictions pass into them with an irresistible power. God visibly blesses your work with a marvelous success. Come to us, said the curates, not as sent by the superior of the Oblates, but as sent by God himself to regenerate Canada. Present yourself as a French-Canadian priest, a child of the people. That people will hear you with more pleasure and follow your advice with more perseverance. Let them know and feel that Canadian blood runs in your veins, that a Canadian heart beats in your breast. Continue to be in the future what you have been in the past. Let the sentiments of true patriot be united with those of a Catholic priest, and when you address the people of Canada, the sidles of Satan will crumble everywhere before you in the district of Montreal, as they have done in that of Quebec. At the head of the French-Canadian curates who thus spoke was my venerable personal friend and benefactor, the Reverend Mr. Brassard, curate of Longueuil. He had not only been one of my most devoted friends and teachers when I was studying in the College of Nicolet, but had helped me with his own money to go through the last 4 years of my studies, when I was too poor to meet my collegiate expenses. No one had thought more highly than he of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate when they first settled in Canada, but their monastery was too near his parsonage for their own benefit. His sharp eyes, high intelligence, and integrity of character soon detected that there were more false varnish than pure gold on their glittering escalons. Several love scrapes between some of the Oblates and the pretty young ladies of his parish, and the long hours of night spent by Father Allard with the nuns established in his village under the pretext of teaching them grammar and arithmetic had filled him with disgust. But what had absolutely destroyed his confidence was the discovery of a long suspected iniquity, which at first seemed incredible to him. Father Gigunis, the superior after his nomination, but before his installation to the bishopric of Ottawa, had been closely watched, and at last discovered when opening the letters of Mr. Brassard, which many times had passed from the post office through his hands. That criminal action had come very near to being brought before the legal courts by Mr. Brassard. This was avoided only by Father Gigunis acknowledging his guilt, asking pardon in the most humiliating way before me and several other witnesses. Long before I left the Oblates, Mr. Brassard had said to me, "The Oblates are not the men you think them to be. I have been sorely disappointed in them, and your disappointment will be no less than mine when your eyes are opened. I know that you will not remain long in their midst. I offer you in advance the hospitality of my parsonage when your conscience calls you out of their monastery." I availed myself of this kind invitation on the evening of the 1st of November in 1847. The next week was spent in preparing the memoir which I intended to present to my Lord Bourget, Bishop of Montreal, as an explanation of my leaving the Oblates. I knew that he was disappointed and displeased with the step I had taken. The curate of Chambly, Reverend Mr. Mignault, having gone to the bishop to express his joy that I had left the monks in order to serve again in the church, in the ranks of the secular clergy, had been very badly received. The bishop answered him, "Mr. Chiniquy may leave the Oblates if he likes, but he will be disappointed if he expects to work in my diocese. I do not want his services." This did not surprise me. I knew that those monks had been imported by him from France, and that they were pets of his. When I entered their monastery, just 11 months before, he was just starting for Rome, and expressed to me the pleasure he felt that I was to join them. My reasons, however, were so good, and the memoir I was preparing was so full of undoubted facts and unanswerable arguments, that I was pretty sure not only to appease the wrath of my bishop, but to gain his esteem more firmly than before. I was not disappointed in my expectation. A few days later I called upon his lordship and was received very coldly. He said, "I cannot conceal from you my surprise and pain at the rash step you have taken. What a shame for all your friends to see your want of consistency and perseverance. Had you remained among those good monks, your moral strength could have been increased more than tenfold. But you have stultified yourself in the eyes of the people as well as in mine. You have lost the confidence of your best friends by leaving, without good reason, the company of such holy men. Some bad rumors are already afloat against you, which give us to understand that you are an unmanageable man, a selfish priest, whom the superiors have been forced to turn out as a black sheep, whose presence could not be any longer tolerated inside the peaceful walls of that holy monastery." Those words were uttered with an expression of bad feeling which told me that I had not heard the 10th part of what he had in his heart. However, as I came into his presence, prepared to hear all kinds of bad reports, angry reproaches, and humiliating insinuations, I remained perfectly calm. I had, in advance, resolved to hear all his unfriendly, insulting remarks, just as if they were addressed to another person, a perfect stranger to me. The last 3 days had been spent in prayers to obtain that favor. My God had evidently heard me, I think it means the R's missing, for the storm passed over me without exciting the least unpleasant feelings in my soul. I answered, "My lord, allow me to tell you that, in taking the solemn step of leaving the monastery of Linguil, I was not afraid of what the world would say or think of me. My only desire is to save my soul and give the rest of my life to my country and my God in a more efficacious way than I have yet done. The rumors which seem to trouble your lordship about my supposed expulsion from the Oblates do not affect me in the least, for they are without the least foundation. From the first to the last day of my stay in that monastery, all the inmates, from the superior to the last one, have overwhelmed me with the most sincere marks of kindness and even of respect. If you had seen the tears which were shed by the brothers when I bade them adieu, you would have understood that I never had more devoted and sincere friends than the members of that religious community. Please read this important document, and you will see that I have kept my good name under my stay in that monastery. I handed him the following testimonial, which the superior had given me when I left. I, the undersigned superior of the Novitiate of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate at Longueuil, do certify that the conduct of Mr. Chiniquy, when in our monastery, has been worthy of the sacred character which he possesses, and after this year of solitude he does not less deserve the confidence of his brethren in the holy ministry than before. We wish, moreover, to give our testimony of his persevering zeal in the cause of temperance. We think that nothing was more of a nature to give a character of stability to the admirable reform and to secure its perfect success than the profound reflections and studies of Mr. Chiniquy, when in the solitude of Longueuil, on the importance of that work. T.F. Allard, Superior of the Novitiate, O.M.I. It was really most pleasant for me to see that every line of that document read by the bishop was blotting out some of the stern and unfriendly lines which were on his face when speaking to me. Nothing was more amiable than his manners when he handed it back to me, saying, I thank God to see that you are still as worthy of my esteem and confidence as when you entered that monastery. But would you be kind enough to give me the real reasons why you have so abruptly separated from the Oblates? Yes, my lord, I will give them to you. But your lordship knows that there are things of such a delicate nature that the lips of man shiver and rebel when required to utter them. Such are some of the deplorable things which I have mentioned to your lordship. I have put those reasons in these pages, which I respectfully request your lordship to read. And I handed him the memoir, about 30 pages long, which I had prepared. The bishop read, very carefully, 5 or 6 pages, and said, Are you positive as to the exactness of what you write here? Yes, my lord. They are as true and real as I am here. The bishop turned pale and remained a few minutes silent, biting his lips, and after a deep sigh said, Is it your intention to reveal those sad mysteries to the world, or can we hope that you will keep that secret? My lord, I answered, if your lordship and the Oblates deal with me, as I hope they will do, as with an honorable Catholic priest, if I am kept in the position which an honest priest has a right to fill in the church, I consider myself bound, in conscience and honor, to keep those things secret. But if from any abuse, persecutions emanating from the Oblates or any other party, I am obliged to give to the world the true reasons of my leaving that monastic order, your lordship understands that, in self-defense, I will be forced to make these revelations. But the Oblates cannot say a word or do anything wrong against you, promptly answered the bishop, after the honorable testimony they have given you. It is true, my lord, that I have no reason to fear anything from the Oblates, I answered. But those religious men are not the only ones who might force me to defend myself. You know another who has my future destinies in his hands. You know that my future course will be shaped by his own toward me. With an amiable smile, the bishop answered, I understand you, but I pledge myself that you have nothing to fear from that quarter. Though I frankly tell you that I would have preferred seeing you work as a member of the monastic institution, it might be that it is more according to the will of God that you should go among the people as sent by God, rather than by a superior who might be your inferior in the eyes of many, in that glorious temperance of which you are evidently the blessed apostle in Canada. I am glad to tell you that I have spoken of you to His Holiness, and he requested me to give you a precious medal which bears his most perfect features with a splendid crucifix. His Holiness has graciously attached 300 days for indulgences to everyone who will take the pledge of temperance in kissing the feet of that crucifix. Wait a minute, added the bishop. I will go and let the... Oh, wait a moment, added the bishop. I will go and get them and present them to you. When the bishop returned, holding in his hands those 2 infallible tokens of the kind sentiments of the Pope towards me, I fell on my knees to receive them and pressed them both to my lips with the utmost respect. My feelings of gratitude, of joy and gratitude in that happy hour cannot be expressed. I remained mute for some time, with surprise and admiration, when holding those precious things which were coming to me. As I then sincerely believed from the very successor of Peter, the true vicar of Christ himself. When handing me those sacred gifts, the bishop addressed me the kindest words which a bishop can utter to his priest, or a father to his beloved son. He granted me the power to preach and hear confessions all over his diocese, and he dismissed me only after having put his hand on my head and asked God to pour upon me his most abundant benedictions everywhere I should go to work in the holy cause of temperance in Canada. Well, that's crazy, isn't it, Nikki?
A little bit. You should read the next one.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. Just go ahead and read it. All right, let's go to chapter 44. Our adorable Savior said, "What king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Luke chapter 14, verse 31. To follow that advice, how often I had fallen on my knees before my God to implore the necessary strength and wisdom to meet that terrible enemy which was marching against me and my brethren. Often I was so discouraged by the sense of my personal incapacity that I came near fainting and flying away at the sight of the power and resources of the foe. But the dear Savior's voice had so many times strengthened me, saying, 'Fear not, I am with thee.' He seemed at every hour to whisper in my ear, 'Be of good cheer, I have overcome the world.' John 16, verse 33. Trusting, then, in my God alone for victory, I nevertheless understood that my duty was to arm myself with the weapons which the learned and the wise men of the past ages had prepared. I again studied the best works written on the subject of wine, from the learned naturalist Pliny to the celebrated Sir Astley Cooper. I not only compiled a multitude of scientific notes, arguments, and facts from these books, but prepared a manual of temperance, which obtained so great a success for such a small country as Canada, that it went through 4 editions of 25,000 copies in less than 4 years. But my best source of information and wisdom was from letters received from Father Matthew and my personal interviews with him when he visited the United States. The first time I met him in Boston, he told me how he regretted his having at first too much relied on the excitement and enthusiasm of the multitudes. Those fits, he said, pass away as quickly as the clouds of the storm, and they too often leave no more traces of their passage. Perseverance and the resolution you have taken in the beginning never to give the pledge except when you give a complete course of lectures on the damning effects of intoxicating drinks. How can we expect that the people will forever give up beverages which they honestly, though ignorantly, believe to be beneficial and necessary to their body? The first thing we do, we must demonstrate to them that these alcoholic drinks are absolutely destructive of their temporal as well as their eternal life. So long as the priests and the people believe, as they do today, that rum, brandy, wine, beer, and cider give strength to help man to keep up his health in the midst of his hard labors, that they warm his blood in winter and cool it in the summer, all our efforts, even our successes, will be like the bundle of straw, which makes a bright light, attracts the attention for a moment, and leaves nothing but smoke and cinders. Hundreds of times I have seen my Irish countrymen honestly taking the pledge for life, but before a week had elapsed, they had obtained a release from their priest, under the impression that they were unable to earn their own living and support their families without drinking those detestable drugs. Very few priests in Ireland have taken the pledge, and still fewer have kept it. In New York, only 2 Irish priests have given up their intoxicating glass, and the very next week I met both of them drunk. Archbishop Hughes turned my humble efforts into ridicule before his priest in my own presence, and drank a glass of brandy to my health with them at his own table to mock me. And here in Boston, the drinking habits of the bishops and his priests are such that I have been forced, through self respect, to quietly withdraw from his palace and come to this hotel. This bad conduct paralyzes and kills me. In saying these last words, that good and noble man burst into a fit of convulsive sobs and tears. His breast was heaving under his vain efforts to suppress his sighs. He concealed his face in his hands, and for nearly 10 minutes he could not utter a word. The spectacle of the desolation of a man whom God has raised so high and so much blessed, and the tears of one who had himself dried so many tears, and brought so much joy, peace, and comfort to so many desolate homes, has been one of the most solemn lessons my God ever gave me. I then learned more clearly than ever that all the glory of the world is vanity, and that one of the greatest acts of folly is to rely for happiness on the praises of men and the success of our own labors. For who had received more merited praises, and who had seen his own labors more blessed by God and man than Father Matthew, whom all ages will call the Apostle of Temperance of Ireland? My gratitude to Mr. Bassard caused me to choose his parish near Montreal for the first grand battlefield of the impending struggle against the enemy of my God and my country. The first week of Advent determined upon for the opening of the campaign, but the nearer the day chosen to draw the sword against the modern Goliath, the more I felt the solemnity of my position, and the more I needed the help of Him on whom alone we can trust for light and strength. I had determined never to lecture on temperance in any place without having previously inquired from the most reliable sources about 1. The number of deaths and accidents caused by drunkenness the last 15 or 20 years. 2. The number of orphans and widows made by drunkenness. 3. The number of rich families ruined and the number of poor families made poorer by the same cause. 4. The appropriate sum of money the approximate sum of money expended by the people during the last 20 years. As the result of my inquiries, I learned that during that short period that 32 men had lost their lives when drunk, and through their drunkenness 25 widows and 73 orphans had been left in the lowest degree of poverty. 72 rich families had been entirely ruined and turned out of their once happy homes by the demon of intemperance, and 90 kept poor. More than $300,000 had been paid in cash, without counting the loss of time, for the intoxicating beverages drank by the people of Longueuil during the last 20 years. For 3 days I spoke twice a day to crowded houses. My first text was, "Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder." Proverbs 23, verses 31 and 32. The first day I showed how alcoholic beverages were biting like a serpent and stinging like an adder, by destroying the lungs, the brain, the liver, the nerves, and the muscles, the blood, and the very life of man. The second day I proved that intoxicating drinks were the most implacable and cruel enemies of the fathers, the mothers, the children, of the young and the old, of the rich and the poor, of the farmers, the merchants, the mechanics, the parish, and the country. The third day I proved clearly that those intoxicating liquors were the enemy of the intelligence and the soul of man, the gospel of Christ and of his holy church, the enemy of all the rights of man and the laws of God. My conclusion was that we were all bound to raise our hands against the gigantic and implacable foe, whose arm was raised against every one of us. I presented the thrilling tableau of our friends, near and dear relations, and neighbors, fallen and destroyed around us, the thousands of orphans and widows whose fathers and husbands had been slaughtered by strong drink. I brought before their minds the true picture of the starving children, the destitute widows and mothers, whose lives had to be spent in tears, ignominy, desolation, and unspeakable miseries from the daily use of strong drink, use of intoxicating drinks. And I requested them to listen to the voices of the thousands of desolate orphans, widows, wives, and mothers coming from every corner of the land, the voices of their priest and their church, the voices of the angels, the Virgin Mary, and the saints in heaven, the voice of Jesus Christ, their Savior, calling them to put an end to the deluge of evils and unspeakable iniquities caused by the use of those cursed drinks. For, said I, those liquors are cursed by millions of mothers and children, widows and orphans, who owe to them a life of shame, tears, and untold desolation. They are cursed by the Virgin Mary and the angels, who are the daily witnesses of the iniquities with which they deluge the world. They are cursed by the millions of souls which they have plunged into eternal misery. They are cursed by Jesus Christ, from whose hands they have wrenched untold millions of souls for whom he died on Calvary. Every one of those truths, incontrovertible, what is that word? Controvertible. For Roman Catholics were falling with irresistible power on that multitude of people. The distress and consternation were so profound and universal that they reacted at last on the poor speaker, who several times could not express what he himself felt except with his tears and his sobs. When I hoped that, by the great mercy of God, all resistances were subdued, the obstacles removed, the intelligence enlightened, the wills conquered, I closed the address, which had lasted more than 2 hours, by an ardent prayer to God to grant us the grace to give us forever the use of those terrible poisons, and to give up the use of those terrible. No, I got that wrong. Stop. Let me go back. When I hoped that, by the great mercies of God, all resistances were subdued, the obstacles removed, the intelligence enlightened, the wills conquered, I closed the address which had lasted more than 2 hours by an ardent prayer to God to grant us the grace to give up forever the use of those terrible poisons, and I requested everyone to repeat with me in their hearts the solemn pledge of temperance in the following words. Adorable and dear Savior, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross to take away my sins and save my guilty soul, for thy glory, the good of my brethren and of my country, as well as for my own good, I promise, with thy help, never to drink, not to give to anybody any intoxicating beverages except when ordered by an honest physician. Our merciful God had visibly blessed the work and his unprofitable servant. This success was above our sanguine expectations. 2,300 citizens of Linguille enrolled under the pledge. I asked them to come to the foot of the altar and kiss the crucifix I was holding as the public and solemn pledge of their engagement. The first thing done by the majority of the intelligent farmers of Longueuil on the return from the church was to break their decanters and their barrels and spill the last drop of the accused drink on the ground. 7 days later, there were 80 requests in my hands to go and show the ravages of alcoholic liquors to man other parishes. Botkerville, Chambly, Varnes, St. Hyacinthe, etc. 3 Rivers, the great city of Montreal, 3 Rivers, and St. Hyacinthe, one after the other, raised the war cry against the usages of intoxicating drink with an unanimity and determination which seemed to be more miraculous than natural. During the 4 years, I gave 1,800 public addresses in 200 parishes with the same fruits and enrolled more than 200,000 people under the banners of temperance. Everywhere, the taverns, the distilleries, the breweries were shut, and their owners forced to make other trades to make a living, not on account of any stringent law, but by the simple fact that the whole people had ceased drinking their beverages, after having been fully persuaded that they were injurious to their bodies, opposed to their happiness, and ruinous to their souls. The convictions were so unanimous and strong on that subject that in many places the last evening I spent in their midst, the merchants used to take all of their barrels of rum, beer, wine, and brandy to the public squares, make a pyramid of them, to which I was invited to set fire. The whole population, attracted by the novelty and sublimity of that spectacle, would then fill the air with their cries and shouts of joy. When the husbands and wives, the parents and children of the redeemed drunkards rent the air with their cries of joy at the destruction of their enemy, and the fire was in full blaze, one of the merchants would give me an axe to stab in the last barrel of rum. After the last drop was empty, I usually stood on it to address some parting words to the people. Such a spectacle baffles any description. The brilliant light of the pine and cedar trees, mixed with all kinds of inflammable materials which everyone had been invited to bring, changed the darkest hour of that night into the brightest of days. The flames, fed by the fiery liquid, shot forth their tongues of fire towards heaven, as if to praise their great God, whose merciful hand had brought the marvelous reformation we were celebrating. The 1,000 faces illuminated by the blaze beamed with joy. The noise of the crackling barrels mixed with that of a raging fire. The cries and shouts of that multitude, with the singing of the Te Deum, formed a harmony which filled every soul with sentiments of unspeakable happiness. But where shall I find words to express my feelings when I had finished speaking? The mothers and wives to whom our blessed temperance had given back a loving husband and some dear children, here crowding around me with their families and redeemed ones to thank me, pressed my hands to their lips, and watered them with their grateful tears. The only thing which marred that joy were the exaggerated honors and unmerited praises with which I was really overwhelmed. I was at first forced to receive an ovation from the curates and people of Longueuil and the surrounding parishes when they presented to me my portrait painted by the artist Hamel, which filled me with confusion, for I felt so keenly that I did not deserve such honors. But it was still worse at the end of May 1849. Judge Mondalet was deputed by the bishop and the priest in the city of Montreal, accompanied by 15,000 people, to present me with a gold medal with a gift of $400. But the greatest surprise my God had in store for me was kept for the end of June, 1850. At that time I was deputed by 40,000 teetotalers to present a petition to the Parliament of Toronto in order to make the rum sellers responsible for the ravages caused to the families of the poor drunkards to whom they had sold their poisonous drugs. The House of Commons, having kindly appointed a committee of 10 members to help me to frame that bill, it was an easy matter to have it passed through the 3 branches. I was present when they discussed and accepted that bill. Napoleon was not more happy after he had won the Battle of Austerlitz than I was when I heard that my pet bill had become law, and that hereafter the innocent victims of the drunken father or husband would receive an indemnity from the land sharks who were fattening on their poverty and unspeakable miseries. But what was my surprise and consternation when, immediately after the passing of the bill, the Honorable DeWitt rose and proposed that a public expression of gratitude should be given me by Parliament under the form of a large pecuniary gift. His speech seemed to me filled with such exaggerated eulogiums that I would have been tempted to think it was mockery, had I not known that the Protestant gentleman was one of my most sincere friends. He was followed by the Honorable Baldwin and LaFontaine, ministers at that time, and a half a dozen other members who went still further into what I so justly consider the regions of exaggeration. It seemed to me bordering on blasphemy to attribute to Chiniquy a reformation which was so clearly the work of my merciful God. The speeches on that subject lasted 2 hours, and were followed by a unanimous vote to present me with $500 as a public testimony of the gratitude of the people for my labors in the temperance reform of Canada. Previous to that, the bishops of Quebec and Montreal had given me tokens of their esteem, which, though unmerited, had been better appreciated by me. When, in May 1850, Archbishop Turregon of Quebec sent the Reverend Charles Balaguerin, curate of Quebec, to Rome to become his successor, he advised him to come to Longueuil and get a letter from me, which he might present to the Pope with the value of my temperance manual. I complied with his request and wrote to the Pope. Some months later, I received the following lines: Rome, August 10th, 1850. Reverend Mr. Chiniquy, Sir and dear friend, Monday, the 12th, was the first opportunity given to me to have a private audience with the Sovereign Pontiff. I presented him your book with your letter, which he received. I will not say with that goodness which is so eminently characteristic of him, but with all special marks of satisfaction and approbation, while charging me to state to you that he accords his apostolic benediction to you and to the holy work of temperance you preach. I consider myself happy to have had to offer on your behalf to the Vicar of Jesus Christ a book which, after it had done so much good to my countrymen, had been able to draw from his venerable lips such solemn words of approbation of the Temperance Society, and of blessings on those who are its apostles, and it is also for my heart a very sweet pleasure to transmit them to you. Your friend, Charles Balaguerin, priest. A short time before I received that letter from Rome, Bishop Bourriquet of Montreal had officially given me the title of Apostle of Temperance. In the following document, which on account of its importance, the readers will probably like to have it in its original Latin, and therefore I can't read that. So we'll just go on. Here we go. I think he has it interpreted here. Translation. Ignatius Bourriquet, by the divine mercy and grace of the Holy Apostolic See, Bishop of Montreal. To all who inspect the present letters, we make known and certify that the Venerable Charles Chiniquy, Apostle of Temperance, priest of our diocese, is very well known to us, and we regard him as proved to lead a praiseworthy life and one agreeable to his ecclesiastical profession. Through the tender mercies of our God, he is under no ecclesiastical censures, at least which have come to our knowledge. We entreat each and all archbishop, bishop, and other dignitaries of the church, to whom it may happen that he may go, that they, for the love of Christ, entertain him kindly and courteously, and as often as they may be asked by him, permit him to celebrate the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and exercise other ecclesiastical privileges of piety, being ourselves ready to grant him these and other greater privileges. In proof of this, we have ordered the present letters to be prepared under our sign and seal, and with subscription of our secretary, in our palace of the Blessed James, in the year 1850, on the 6th day of the month of June. Ignatius, Bishop of Marianopolis, by order of the most illustrious and most reverend Bishop of Marianopolis, D.D. J.O. Père Canaan, Secretary. No words from my pen can give an idea of the distress and shame I felt when these unmerited praises and public honors began to flow upon me. For when the siren voice of my natural pride was near to deceive me, there was the noise of a sudden storm in my conscience, crying with a louder voice, Chiniquy, thou art a sinner, unworthy of such praises and honors. This conflict made me very miserable. I said to myself, are those great successes due to my merits, my virtues, and my eloquence? No, surely no. They are due to the great mercy of God for my dear country. Shall I not forever be put to shame if I consent to these flattering voices which come to me from morning till night, to make me forget that to my God alone, and not to me, must be given the praise and glory of that marvelous reform? These praises were coming every day, thinker, I think it should be thicker, shouldn't it? Thicker and thicker, through the thousand trumpets of the press, as well as through the addresses daily presented me from the places which had been so thoroughly reformed. Those unmerited honors were bestowed on me by multitudes who came in carriages and on horseback, bearing flags with bands of music to receive me on the borders of their parishes, where the last parishes had just brought me with the same kind of ovations. Sometimes the roads were lined on both sides by thousands and thousands of maple, pine, or spruce trees, which they had carried from distant forests in spite of all my protests. How many times the curates who were sitting by me in the best carriages, drawn by their most splendid horses, asked me, why do you look so sad when you see all these faces beaming with joy? I answered, I am sad because these unmerited honors these good people do me seem to be the shortest way the devil has found to destroy me. But the reform you have brought about is so admirable and so complete. The good which is done to the individuals as well as to the whole country is so great and universal that the people want to show you their gratitude. Do you know, my dear friends, I answered, that marvelous change is too great to be the work of man? It is not evidently the work of God? To him and him alone, then we ought to give the praise and the glory. The constant habit after these days of ovation was to pass a part of the night in prayer to God, to the Virgin Mary, and to all the saints in heaven, to prevent me from being hurt by these worldly honors. It was my custom then to read the Passion of Jesus Christ, from his triumphant entry into Jerusalem to his death on the cross, in order to prevent this shining dust from adhering to my soul. There was a verse of the gospel which I used to repeat very often in the midst of these exhibitions of the vanities of this world. What is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Matthew chapter 16, verse 26. Another source of serious anxiety for me was then coming from the large sums of money constantly flowing from the hands of my too kind and grateful Reformed countrymen into mine. It was very seldom that the public expression of gratitude presented me in their rhetorical addresses were not accompanied by a gift of from $50 to $200, according to the means and importance of the place. Those sums multiplied by the 365 days of the year would have soon made of me one of the richest men in Canada. Had I been able to trust in my own strength against the dangers of riches, I should have been able easily to accumulate a sum of at least $70,000, with which I might have done a great amount of good. But I confess that, when in the presence of God, I went to the bottom of my heart to see if it were strong enough to carry such a glittering weight. I found it, by far, too weak. I knew so many who, though evidently stronger than I was, had fallen on the way and perished under too heavy burden of their treasures, that I feared for myself at the sight of such unexpected and immense fortune. Besides, when only 18 years old, my venerable and dear benefactor, the Reverend Mr. Leperhon, director of the College of Nicolet, had told me a thing I had never forgotten. Chiniquy, he said, I am sure you will be what we call a successful man in the world. You will easily make your way among your contemporaries, and consequently it is probable that you will have many opportunities of becoming rich. But when the silver and gold flow into your hands, do not pile and keep it, for if you set your affection on it, you will be miserable in this world and damned in the next. You must not do like the fattened hogs, which give their grease only after their death. Give it while you are living, then you will not be blessed only by God and man, but you will be blessed by your own conscience. You will live in peace and die joy. That's beautiful. Did you hear that?
It is beautiful.
These solemn warnings from one of the wisest and best friends God had ever given me when young has never gone out of my mind. I found them corroborated in every page of that Bible which I loved so much and studied every day. I found them also written by God in my heart. I then, on my knees, took the resolution, without making an absolute vow to it, to keep only what I wanted for my daily support and give the rest to the poor or some Christian or patriotic object. I kept that promise. The $500 given me by Parliament did not remain 3 weeks in my hands. I never put a cent in Canada in the vaults of any bank. And when I left for Illinois in the fall of 1851, instead of taking with me $70,000, as it would have been very easy had I been so minded, I had hardly $1,500 in my hand, the price of a part of my library, which was too heavy to be carried so far away. Wow. I tell you what, Satan knows how to ensnare a person, but you know what? God knows how to deliver it. I just want to cry, and I'm not going to cry, but that's just beautiful. You know, that's just beautiful. See, God knows people's hearts, Nikki. And even though he grew up Catholic, he was in the Catholic, religion for 50 years, you see that God knew his heart and worked with him throughout.
Showing them little bits as they went on.
Wow. Just amazing. All right. Well, I'm going to end that there. So we were able to read chapter 43 and 44 today. Brothers and sisters, keep your eyes on Jesus and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you will not sin against God or be deceived. Till next time, be blessed.